So getting back to how Mouse ruined comics.
Okay.
All right, 30 seconds. Your 30 seconds are up. No more boomer music.
How about that?
I have to remove it. I forgot the way it was set up. It doesn't automatically go away. Oh my god!
Well, how about that? We were just talking about cartoon animals, and then immediately the very first thing he talks about is mouse.
Yeah. Oh yeah. How do you thought about that? Ladies and gents, it's another Wednesday. It's another episode of the Mattriarchy. I am, of course, as usual, your host, Matt Reese. I am today joined by a variation on today's panel, on our typical panel. We've got Cartoonicus coming to us from space.
Stay tuned.
From space. And we've got our featured Josh the Cartoon Guy, who is going to be sharing with us his webcomic, Jane Smith Wannabe Gladiator, who we have addressed before in a Comics Creators Club segment a while ago, but we only checked out like the first few pages of that one. And here we've got the entire first chapter or first book, or however you want to break it up. Josh, tell us, how do you like to think of this in terms of the opus that is Jane Smith?
I guess I'm calling it a book now because it has a beginning and a middle and an end. So it's the opening to a longer saga, but it is self-contained. You can read it and get come away with a nice moment of catharsis by the end of it. I don't leave her hanging off a cliff.
Not too
much.
Hey,
the metal!
Hey, the metal!
Hey, the metal! That's where sword.
Yeah, you also have me. How are you doing?
Excellent. We had given up hope. I'm so glad to see you, though, man.
Oh, but you don't see me. You just hear me.
Ah, yes, you know what I mean. It's like
he didn't say see you. He said see ya. One word.
Yeah. When I was young, I would always say, "Can I see this?" or "Can I see that?" And I was routinely told, "You don't see with your hands." Yeah,
if you hold it in your hands, you do.
Goodness sakes!
Blind people do.
If you're in that movie The Gate where he had an eyeball in his hand, then you might see with your hands.
Well, I don't think I've seen that movie. Although they did.
Oh, it's
do
a
that
classic
bit.
like 80s horror schlock.
Thinking about real monsters.
They did do that bit, the eye in the hand in Pan's Labyrinth.
Yeah, they did.
With everybody's favorite super skinny guy, Doug Jones.
Yeah, it was the Pale Man.
I had a chance to meet Doug Jones a couple of times, actually. He is one of the nicest guys I've ever met, but he is actually all hands.
Meaning
like he'll shake your hand and he'll hold it and he'll touch your shoulder and he's very present with everyone. I mean, it's not like in a creepy way, but like I'm not used to like, being like approached by people that aren't my family. so it's a situation where he's very friendly and he's present and like with anybody, but he'll shake your hand with one hand and then he'll put his other hand around it. And just like he's super glad to see you. And so
that's not normal?
Not for me.
Okay.
Is he from the South? We're huggers here.
I'm not sure where he's from.
Yeah. In like the Dallas area of Texas, it's like super common of how just people greet each other.
Yeah. If he wasn't so warm, his spirit were warm, it might be a little off-putting, but he's very, very, very just kind. One of the kindest people I've ever met.
Nice.
And yeah. So anyhow, we're not here to talk about Doug Jones, who I've on good authority is a fraud. So that's the line from a movie. Never mind. Anyway.
All right.
Yeah, Isaac Larkin says the two-handed handshake was asking for your vote. No, I don't think he has any political ambition whatsoever. So, which is pretty great.
As I'm saying, sometimes in the South, you end up like hugging somebody that you just met for the first time. That's just the energy of the room,
Yeah. I have had that experience too. So
By the way, before we get started, I just want to point out this that to everybody, and the reason he said I was from space earlier. My internet has been out ever since Hurricane Helena, and we finally broke down and got Starlink. It is not nearly as fast as cable internet, and so we're wondering how it's going to fare on this live stream. So far, I definitely have evidence that probably about every 5 minutes or so, you do start breaking up and sounding something like the robot from Portal. Can't remember her name. So just if you're talking to me
GLaDOS.
and I don't immediately respond or something, just understand that's probably why.
Well, good. We will roll with the punches. We will make it work. And it's very interesting that we're talking about tech problems because that's sort of a tangential theme to Josh's comic. So,
what a segue!
What a segue! Look at
Techno Wizard of Oz. Let's go.
Nearly a pro. So, does anybody, now it's not a typical comics creators club, it's not one at all, we're just talking about Josh's book here, but does somebody besides Josh want to give a pitch for Jane Smith Wannabe Gladiator?
Sure. In the future, people live in digital lives. They like to fight each other in digital space. I lost my connection.
I've got to add some bois to that, Cartoonicus. Like Transformers style. Bois, bois.
Oh, man.
Okay. Would you like an actual pitch?
Yes, please do.
I suddenly regret everything I've ever done.
All right. Basic actual pitch. Country girl who's tired of living in the shadow of her much bigger and athletic brother who excels in everything, including martial arts, decides that she wants to get into combat herself and goes through an alternative route of entering VR systems where she trains to be a virtual gladiator. That's all you get.
There you go.
All right, A plus the medal. Excellent book report.
Well, you know, I have not read it recently, but I have read, I think, pretty much everything we're covering before. I was keeping up with things as they were initially being published.
Oh, Isaac Larkin has a comment. A sister sorting of her feelings towards living in her brother's shadow and being the person she wants to be. Thank you, Isaac.
That's great.
You have such a great chat, Matt.
Wow. Oh, and I think this may be Isaac's like third week here. I don't know. I might be wrong about that, but it's a newer name, and I appreciate people coming back around for things. So, I also want to point out earlier, Jim Tuner, of course, who is right about everything, has come here. He says Twitless has already ruined the show, and that's
he's not even here.
He's not even here too, and that's actually the problem. I mean, he's always so insightful. And I've come to take him entirely for granted, and now I know. So, so that's the situation with that. By his mere absence, he's sort of taken us a notch down.
And to get our feminine opinion, Star wants us to know that the brother is a cutie too. He's very Clark Kenty.
He's a burly man. That's the bottom line there.
I was going to say that for a comic that has a very scratchy kind of underground art feel, there are a lot of times where it has some very cute art.
Well, before we dig into the story, let's actually spend a little bit of time talking about the art, because I think in terms of like web comics and in comics as a whole, this comic does something that I have never seen anybody do before. So, Marm, Josh, spend some time. Tell us a little bit about your process in making Jane Smith.
Oh boy. All right. So it's the classic, like, what inspired me. All right. So Jane Smith's been percolating in my head for years now. I think I waited to start writing it until I had something beyond just, like ideas for action scenes in my head. I'll tell this story. It actually started out as I thought it would be funny to make fun of Yu-Gi-Oh by having like a one-page comic where people play leapfrog in the future using like billion-dollar virtual reality systems, and the joke was just going to be ha ha ha, everything's so dramatic in anime. And so then I drew the characters for it, and Jane Smith was not one of the initial characters I was going to use for the one-page comic. I started thinking about, well, how does the fighting system work? And I thought, I actually really like these characters, and I kind of like this scenario. So I'm going to scratch the haha, make fun of anime side of it, and maybe try to turn this into an actual comic. And then Jane Smith actually came into the story probably like after like a year of me thinking about like what the animal characters were going to be and what the fighting system was going to be. And so I think like her older brother was a version of her older brother was always there from the beginning. So it's been a long work in process. I think it really clicked for me because I think J.K. Rowling once said of Harry Potter that he sort of rolled into her head one day while she was riding the train. So I think sometime when I was in art school, the idea of what this character's story was going to be rolled into my head. And then once I had that, I kind of understood who she was. And that's when I got serious about writing it beyond just like a loose ideas in my sketchbooks. So, yeah, I think I started with the character, and I decided her arc is going to be what's important. This is going to be the human side that people connect with. And I'm going to kind of like build the virtual reality idea around her. Because I didn't want to like come in and say, here's 60 pages of lore about how video games work in my world, right? I wanted you to follow a person, and even like her name, Jane Smith, that was a placeholder name where the more I thought about it, the more I thought that is who she is. She is a Jane Smith, and that she's an very ordinary sort of person in what you gradually come to realize is this sort of bigger, stranger world. The world she lives in is much like ours, but has virtual reality technology kind of beyond what we have today, in part because this is sort of like my dream of what I wish virtual reality was. It's kind of like weird that in the time I've been writing Jane Smith, AI has like gone from being like a weird little niche interest to being something that everybody talks about and is omnipresent in our lives now, right? So the world's catching up with me. I've got to draw faster so I can predict the future.
Yeah, I know that. I know
yes.
that. I know that feeling intimately. We when we started on our universe with Forces, we set it like the year before we started publishing it, and our intention was to move toward to 2012 as a huge event within where several of our series would converge on events happening in 2012, and well. Yeah, that was 12 years ago, so we still haven't gotten there.
That's why I tend to like to do period pieces.
Yeah, well, again, that's what we're doing now.
I do period pieces. I just don't let people know what period it's in.
There you go. There you go. So Isaac
Well, that
Larkin
actually
says,
is my number one rule when I am writing a futuristic piece.
Isaac Larkin says, do you separate the tone of black and white to show a form of depression she feels? The color shows her showing the raw feelings shining through, also being a teenager finding the real person.
That's not a bad interpretation. So what I take Isaac to mean is like, is black and white a symbol of depression? Is color a symbol of raw emotion? Yes and no. Like, she is very depressed at the start of the story, and you find out why later. She's starting in a pretty dark place. So yeah, for me, like, black and white is a more somber style, and color's a more, jubilant style. I also, just practically speaking, I wanted a really strong way to distinguish what is the difference between real life and the fantastic reality of the game world. It's the Wizard of Oz.
Yeah, like I mentioned, it's Techno Wizard of Oz.
Yeah, down to me having like a yellow brick road later. Yeah, so it's half. I needed a practical way of distinguishing these things, and I do use some tiny bits of color in the black and white pages. My thinking was anything that's sort of connected to the digital world has color, so it has a practical purpose, and I think it helps sell maybe like underscore an emotional idea too. When she's in the world, she starts to come alive more in the other world.
And one of the things that I want to talk about too, in terms of the process, is that you work in paper, and charcoal, and I don't believe I have ever known of another comic project that uses charcoal as its primary thing. I know you and I have talked about that, but I don't know that we've gotten it on stream before. What was your
I actually think he
motivation?
did talk about this
Did
on
we
the Comics Creators Club, but honestly, it would be great for him to go over it again.
Yes.
Sure. I sometimes wonder if it was a good idea. I drew in charcoal a lot in art school. It's a medium I'm comfortable with. I like that it's messy and doesn't forgive mistakes.
Yes.
So I think I got as far as like inking the first page traditionally, and I just thought, I like charcoal better. Charcoal produces a nice rich black. Why don't I just work in my preferred medium, right? So there are actually like times where I'm like really struggling, to get it to work with lettering, right? So I call myself a tradigital artist. So I'm using digital lettering in Photoshop to clean up my work and do clean lettering, but I get to keep a lot of the messiness and maybe some of the expressiveness of charcoal. And I even kind of like the irony that this is a very sci-fi futuristic world, but the art itself is using a very old school method.
Well, did you say tradigital?
Tradigital, yeah.
I'd not heard that before.
I'm going to steal that and use that because I
Yeah.
do all the penciling and inking traditionally, and then I go and color and letter. So I'm going to be extra digital now.
That's what we do as well. With most of our ideal projects, not all of them. Barry does a lot of straight to digital work with stuff, but Forces was always, we actually used India ink and dip pens when we first started with Forces. And my son Taliesin in the recent Grab It stuff, he does it all on paper, and then we scan it in and treat it after that. So I really like that that flexibility. I also like the immediacy of and tangibility of it all. But so your the method of your work was to focus on something you're already familiar with, something that had that evocative, that bright contrast on things. What would you say from start to finish? How long does it take you, barring real life problems, to do a page?
Okay, I've started doing 2 pages at once. I think for these very first few pages, I was doing 1 page at a time. And this comic was a real learning experience for me because I'd done little mini comics before this, but I'd never done anything quite this long and involved. So when I do 2 pages at a time, then it's probably 12 hours to do 2 pages from beginning to finish. So it ends up being 6 hours a page. And that was an improvement on my old process where I would do 1 page all together and then 1 page all together. Right. So it probably used to be like 8 hours a page down to 6 hours a page. Oh, hey, Nanji, I read Jane Smith in preparation for the stream. I think you liked it better the second read through. Well, thank you, Nanji.
For those of you who might not know, Nanji himself does a webcomic. It's My Turn to Save the World. It's hilarious and amazing, and you should read all of it twice. So I love it. So anyhow, now with this first story, this first book that we have here, it's about 139 pages or so, which I didn't realize the page count until I went through and looked for it in preparation for the stream here. That's a weird page count for a thing that's intended to be printed matter. Did it just work out to that, or did you have a plan for it to be that long for particular reasons?
It worked out to that, yeah. So sometimes I would get to a fight scene in my script, and I would say they fight, and then that sentence would become 12 pages of action sequences, right? So I am very much like I figure it out in the layout phase. I was trying to shoot for a round number, like 75, 100, 125, 150. But I figured if I'm a little short of the 150 mark, I could always just put in some bonus art and fan art and commissions I've gotten of the characters.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, I had another question in my head that just popped in there. Oh, you're talking about the script. You said they fight, which is hilarious. Are you working from a full script as you put this together, or what is your process on that part of it?
My writing process is I outline a chapter, and then I actually did sit down and write a script for this entire first book. But when I got into the comic art phase, that's where I might realize, oh, I've got to develop something visually different than I thought in the script. And my tendency in script writing is I write paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs of dialogue, which I don't think makes for good comics. I think that comics is a medium of very punchy dialogue. So I kind of use the Stan Lee method on myself, which is I start with my script to give me a structure. I draw it, and then when I get into lettering, that's where I actually hammer down what the final dialogue is going to be. And usually it's a process of editing down the paragraphs of dialogue down to the most essential wording. You got to get across the idea, right? Without wasting the reader's time.
Mm-hmm. So, I think, as in my typical super prepared fashion, I think that was all the questions about the production side of it all.
Well, I'm curious. When you're putting in color, how does that work with charcoal? Are you having to put the color down first?
That's another thing I kind of taught myself how to do. So the first few pages, I literally would color with oil pastel because I wanted a traditional look throughout. And then I scanned the oil pastel and superimposed it. And that was too messy a process and too extensive a process. So what I ended up doing was I have oil pastel texture packets. So they have a traditional look, but then I color it digitally and I superimpose that texture on top. So I'm using digital tools to color, but the final look has that kind of like papery quality to fit with the charcoal.
Gotcha. Cool.
And if you're interested in seeing this, you can actually go to #1 Marmaduke Fan's channel and look at different streams and premieres that he's put of the long process of making these pages.
Yeah.
That is true.
Okay, related to that. So one of the things I learned was in my early pages, a lot of the colors were really muddy because I was just superimposing the color on top. I kind of had to like relearn something. So like in art school, my painting instructor would tell me never darken a color with black because all black does is it will diminish the power of the color. It just makes things darker, but it ruins the color, right? So when I was just plopping the color down on top of the black art, the result was very dense, very dark, very muddy colors. And as I got better at digital coloring, then I sort of like unlocked ways of sort of having like the grayscale be purple or having the skin tones be kind of like a richer red, right? I did go back and tweak a couple of the old pages with my new coloring style, but I think that as it progressed, it gets a lot brighter and a little clearer to read as well.
I think that's actually very, very true, but it's not something that I noticed in reading. It's something that I now that you mention it, I noticed in looking back at it. But at the time, it's probably the progression of skills as we as a reader are becoming acquainted with your visual language. And as it progresses, I maybe just didn't notice that how it had changed in that book.
It's almost like the intensity of the world ramps up as you're reading it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, and that actually makes sense because the events within the story change. Their intensity goes from the beginning of the story. Jane is contemplating her own sadness and going in about the thing, and her internal life gets much more complex as the story moves along, which is something that I really appreciate too. Because Jane's character is so interesting, and we may get to that later. But her own motivations, her own ideas behind things is very intriguing to me. I guess one question that I have here too, in relation to the world building aspect of it, is you have set the story in Nebraska, which puts it on a very, very, very small number of comic stories that are based in Nebraska. Was there a particular reason that you picked Nebraska?
I couldn't resist. they say write what you know, and I think Sonic the Hedgehog was originally from Nebraska. In some
He was.
Yeah, it's a way of suggesting humble origins. I know a that it fits with the character. B, I know Nebraska because I'm from Nebraska. Yeah, I like the contrast of the ordinariness of Nebraska versus kind of like the scope of the world. And since I'm basically using virtual reality as my version of the magical reality, like if you want to bring in maybe like mythopoeic language, then every great fairy tale is a person from ordinary circumstances is brought into a magical world, and their encounter in the magical world is what changes them. Now, but in my case, there's a literal magical world. You can literally go into virtual reality, and so the virtual world is real in a sense, right? So I wanted something that was grounded, that would feel normal, compared to the weirdness I was going to throw at people in the virtual land.
So
It's a classic Portal story.
Yeah. So also, I discovered something very fascinating. So, totally side note from Jane Smith. I'm going to derail for a second. So those of you guys, we know my introduction into comics was in the newspaper, but my heavy investment was through DC Comics. And I am, along with Hutch, who is not here today. He had a different thing he is busy with today. We are two of the world's biggest fans of Elongated Man, Ralph Dibny. And a little known fact, although it's not a secret by any stretch, Ralph Dibny is from rural Nebraska. There's a city within. There are two rural cities that are major players in the DC universe. They're Blue Valley, where Kid Flash and Star Spangled, the Stargirl are from, and there is Waymore, Nebraska. What I found out, and I recently found out that Blue Valley is an actual unofficial real part here in Nebraska. I did not know that until about 3 years ago. There's actually a section south of Lincoln that they call Blue Valley, which is nuts. But today I was looking at a map, and Waymore was inspired by the real town of Wymore. And Wymore, I am interested in because that's where the Great Plains Welsh Heritage Center is at. And someday I will visit there on some sort of pilgrimage. But about a quarter mile north of Wymore is the town of Blue River, just north of Wymore. And I was shocked to find that out. So the Blue Valley is significantly far from Waymore in the DC universe, but their real life contemporaries are just a quarter mile away from each other, and that was fascinating to me. But anyhow, comics in Nebraska. Moving on. So, when you in the digital world, Jane is, of course, the full VR unit. It's people sitting inside of pods to have their gaming and all that kind of stuff. What were the things that shaped your picture of this VR virtual world?
Well, okay, so Yu-Gi-Oh was one, since the whole thing was conceived of as a giant Yu-Gi-Oh parody. Like to me, the comedy of Yu-Gi-Oh is they play a card game and they have billion-dollar virtual reality systems to bring the card game to life. I've never seen Ready Player One, but a lot of this was kind of in the atmosphere. Sword Art Online was really big when I was conceiving Jane Smith. Now, to me, the thing about all of these virtual reality stories is the hook is, in a world where virtual reality is real, and then always, the bad guy will trap them in the virtual world or something. And if you die in the virtual world, you die in real life. And to me, the interesting idea was always, well, what would virtual reality do to us, right? Because to me, it's almost like a dream world. It would be a dream to go into the world of your favorite video game and experience it as if you yourself were there in person, right? So to me, it's partially the fantasy of this is kind of what I want the future to be. And I'm not too concerned about things being mechanically, realistic. If I could build a virtual world like this, I would, and I'd make Elon Musk money, right? So I'm kind of fancy. When you go back to a lot of like 1950s science fiction, they are speculating about what their future will look like in a very optimistic and a very unique way. It's they're worried about the fears of people in the 1950s, and they're imagining cool things like flying cars that are still kind of cool, right? So I kind of wanted on purpose to say the coolest thing you could possibly imagine is just here. Don't worry too much about the mechanics of how it works. What's interesting is the impact it would have on people like Jane. What would it mean to the average girl if there's a literal other world you can go experience where you can have powers beyond your imagination, right? How would that affect churches? How would that affect, like the average school kid?
One of the reasons that comes up specifically is that, like we've talked about, AI and VR are things that have become integrated into our life in the last several years, and the idea of the Matrix style pods, right, is almost in itself an artifact of the past, with the way VR goggles and motion capture cameras and all that kind of stuff have taken that place in the real world, and that in itself is interesting from a different viewpoint, because you've got this futuristic technology. Pardon me for a moment. Allergies. You've got this futuristic technology that crops up, but the mechanisms by which they're accessing it are still somewhat of a relic of the first of the 20-aughts and the 2010s. And that's not meant as any kind of judgment or anything. It's just an interesting because, like you said, technology's caught up with you as you were working this out and workshopping it, and drawing
right.
it.
And I kind of thought of like, well, what if it's the Elon Musk Neuralink angle where you get like the microchip in your brain, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I kind of wanted it to feel magic. So and hopefully people don't worry too much about, well, how do the machines actually work, right? Yeah. I might get into some of that more, because I am interested in like the mechanics of like what would be realistic virtual reality technology, but I also don't want to burden the reader with that too much. It's sort of
Right.
like VR is more a vehicle to create a narrative for Jane than this is not a realistic mechanical. Here is how I think space travel will work within 200 years in the future, right?
Well, yeah, it's like the holodeck in TNG, right? The whole purpose
If
is
someone
not
asks, right, just be like, how's it work? Overtime and underpaid.
I like it. That's great.
Honestly, I think one of the more brilliant things you could have done was just putting them in those big spheres and closing it in so that we don't even get to see what happens.
Mm-hmm.
We just accept that whatever's happening in there, this is the result.
I don't know who said it, but a sufficiently developed technology
Yes.
indistinguishable from magic. Yeah.
Orson Card, wasn't it?
No, that's Clark.
Clark. Oh, that's
Remember,
right.
we
That's
call it
right.
Clark Tech.
Yep. You're right. That's the case. So now one of the things, also sidetracking a little bit to a previous point, because I think it was really interesting. Star points out aren't a lot of comic artists from the Midwest, and actually a big reason that comics were so big was a lot of readers came from there. Yes. In fact, last winter I had the mixed fortune of reading what was available at the time of Local Hero, that was written by a fellow from Wisconsin, and that was this man's very mixed feelings about being from Wisconsin was very apparent in his comic. I can't remember Tim Seeley, I think, and I can't remember who else, but yeah, there's definitely, and Gene Ha is from around out this, well, not here, further east from here, but I'm way out west for being whatever, but yeah, there are a number of big comic guys from out here. Oh, that lovely gentleman that wrote blankets. Actually, there you go. Drop that in. There's a comic artist from the Midwest. Name totally escapes me. Anyway, so onto the story here. We're looking at this Jane, who is training within the virtual world in this scene here, is being chased by a dummy that looks like a sumo wrestler or a clown or something.
And the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man.
So, which is great visually. It's just super fun because this dummy or whatever is so the levels of like inborn clumsiness are just amazing in it. The thing I found out the scene that is most interesting is it gives a great opportunity to demonstrate through his very, his movement set seems to lack in animation. Seems to be like you might imagine a giant balloon might be, but at the same time is it a genuine threat to Jane in her position as a something of a neophyte.
Yeah, and so like I take a lot of inspiration from manga. I don't call myself a mangaka, but I think I try to take story beat ideas from manga. So one thing I've noticed a action manga does that seems rare in the West is they will have a extensive fight scene or an extensive chase scene, and maybe over the course of several chapters, every beat of the fight or every beat of the chase is a character beat as well, which is something I really like, right? In contrast to Western superhero comics, which are that's sort of more the art of condensing. Like I am definitely doing a decompressed story with only maybe like 3 or 4 panels a page, right? So in the chase, because I don't want to burden people with long lists of mechanics. I want to show people what is it like to use the mechanics in this world. How good is Jane at using it? And so then the dummy can kind of be like a sort of like a benchmark of here's how the average idiot looks. Watching Martha do it, you get a sense that Martha has a better handle on how this is working, and Jane's kind of like able to like jump and use the abilities, but kind of tripping and stumbling as she's going. So it's like learning to ride a bicycle. You fall over while learning to ride a bicycle.
One of the other side of that too is talking about comic history and how the action beats are the character beats, and how that like a lot of American comics did a lot with compression. It was not uncommon to have those elements in comics before like the early 80s, before the mid 80s even, and it's something that as more internal monologue has replaced thought bubbles, and as talking heads pages have leaked their way into action comics, not the title action but the genre of action comics. I think we've lost some of that element where we expect our story beats to happen when our character is talking to their faithful sidekick or whatever, as opposed to seeing them demonstrate character development in the middle of their journeys. So it's one of those things I think that you're talking about, that being part of it, and it definitely is part of what we see developed in a lot of manga, but it was not foreign to American comics. It just has been expurgated by certain movements. I'm not even sure who to blame for that, but it might be Neil.
I will use violence to defend the use of speech thought bubbles in comic
books. Yeah,
well,
and that
if I may also say, I really appreciate the use of the little sprite character and the fact that this is the tutorial to teach us how the game works without it feeling like it's just not monologue. What's the word I'm looking for?
Exposition dumping.
Thank you. Exposition.
Well, and it also makes it feel very video gamey, which is one of the things that I think that you do a really good, that I really appreciate too about it, is it does have that that it's a hard thing to blend comics and video games, but there seems to be a natural desire to do that, and also like a natural crossover between those. And as much as like, you know, your big two editorial staff, you know, have been demeaning video games for, you know, 30, 40 years. The fact is that they're not really competitors in the way that I think that the pros want us to think they are.
It also triggers me because I hate tutorials in video games. So pretty much in a good way too, because like the entire time that this is going on, I kind of feel how Jane feels, because she's like, you know, I've done this a bunch, but I have to go through it every single time because I don't own my own system. And like, I hate tutorials, Jane. I know how you feel.
Okay,
Well,
see,
I can
that
figure
right
it out
there-
myself.
that right there is why we need less sequels and more DLC.
Well, and the funny thing about that too, though, is it's one of those things where, like, Jane hates the tutorial, but she kind of still needs it, you know, which is one of the things that I really appreciated about this story. Because the other thing about it is when you actually started getting charcoal to paper, so to speak, there, Josh, that was sort of in the moment when there was a lot of the, dare I call it, the anti-woke art that started cropping up significantly. And the idea that, you know, not every girl boss should be a girl boss, so to speak.
Yeah, and I've talked about this before, so I'll just kind of like mention like the idea of the strong female protagonist is a deliberate motivation for me, where my view of the heroine is supposed to be just like a hero. A heroine should be a flawed character, right? So when you have a strong female girl boss throwing fully grown men around, it's abandoning any sense of reality, and it's abandoning any sense of drama. And part of the whole fun of a female protagonist is because she's a woman, because she's not as physically strong as the big strong men. That's creating a sense of drama. And I mentioned it before, but I'll mention it again. From Far Away is my favorite manga. It is criminally underrated. It is out of print, so please don't go buy it, because that'll run up the price for me trying to recollect it again. But the whole premise of From Far Away is a teenage Japanese girl finds herself in a magical world, and she has no superpowers. She doesn't speak the language, and she is basically helpless. Yet she rises to the challenge of surviving in this world, and she becomes memorable because she finds so many ways to be useful without having superpowers. And of course, her boyfriend is like this superpowered Goku level supernatural fighter, right? But she manages to contribute just as much as he does in a lot of the situations.
Well, and that's one of the things that I think a lot of the you know, the strong female character trademark community missed, is that we don't even want our male heroes to be, you know, the flawless, the never have to struggle character. We enjoy seeing Indiana Jones get kicked in the face, right? Because it's a matter of him rising above the challenge. You know, I mean, that's like at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark, right? Jones is entirely captured. He's entirely a victim of the circumstance in which he finds himself, and it's only by his wit that allows him to survive, and that's part of the you know, amazing aspect of that story. If he just went in there and punched everybody in the mouth and saved the day, and, you know, snatched the ark and carried it back on his shoulders, it wouldn't be worth watching, right? So the struggle is part of the journey, and I think that so many modern writers don't really appreciate that, or else they're Tom King and only appreciate struggle and don't really see success as an option. But that's a different story. That's for a different show this month. Actually, next week.
I think one of the commenters mentioned that, you know, they didn't find Jane that likable on the first read through, which I'm fine with, because I open with showing you her, like she said, I think one of her first thoughts is, God, I hate him, while looking at her brother, right? So I'm deliberately showing you this is the darkest element of the character, and I spend the whole first book essentially punishing her, right? So because she has a flaw, I want you to see how what she's doing isn't working, right? Which is part of the fun. And the transfer, again, like the character transformation ties into the physical battle. Like the first enemy you need to defeat is yourself.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Very cool.
I like it.
And one of the so a couple things from the chat. Isaac points out she did not get overly sexualized when she is in VR. She's still a true version of herself, which I think is important, especially since we're dealing with well, I'm not sure how old Jane is.
Well, she's supposed to be 14. I wanted to be careful about that, right?
Yeah.
Because I like, you know, she's a young, pretty girl, right? She's supposed to be like a knockout, beautiful girl. But I really, how do I think about that? I guess my thought is, you know, like sex is fine because sex is part of life. But
Right.
to me, the difference is like if I am Jane, if I'm sort of inhabiting Jane's mind as I go through her world, then I'm not treating her like, you know, the toy for my fantasies. I'm treating her as this is how I would experience this world through her eyes, right?
Well, and it's not true for every girl that games, but I've known more than one that they'll go in and they'll make their little custom avatar, and it's just them, right? I mean, they very, very meticulously make it look like them. You know, maybe 15 pounds lighter, but you know, they're not seeking to become like.
That's probably going to be the average. There's a lot of studies by toy companies about this on how guys and girls play with toys differently or what they want from it.
Absolutely.
And girls tend to basically project themselves onto the toy, while guys tend to project the toy onto them. Like you literally become He-Man or Optimus Prime when you're doing it, while girls tend to want like a Barbie that looks like them. Now, this obviously isn't true for everyone, but when you're selling to people, you're looking at what the averages are.
Right.
Although in a video game, it's different. The guys just all play girls.
Sometimes. Well, I think with what kind of game you're playing. I've found that like if I'm doing like an RPG and I have an interest in playing like a villainous playthrough, I have a harder time like taking that from a male perspective because I do not like to think of myself as a villain. So I can more easily separate myself from a character if it doesn't look anything like me. So
anyway, can I say something? And that is,
please.
I hope this doesn't come off as an insult, but I actually didn't see her as if she was supposed to be some, you know, beautiful knockout. Remember when I was saying earlier that you had really cute art? Actually, I thought she always seems to come off like a much more, you know, cute, innocent character to me, which I actually liked because I prefer that. But
well, there's you know, she's 14.
Maybe the way I should word that is she doesn't know how pretty she is, right? So she's the shy girl, right? With messy hair. She has big ears that she's self-conscious about, right? Like I wanted to give her something like, should I give her a big nose? Should she be a little plump? And I kind of settled on big ears is a fun thing that, you know, I've had sisters. And I think that, so like my experience as a guy who knows a lot of girls is I think girls feel self-conscious about their bodies in a way that is harder for a guy to wrap their head around. I think guys feel self-conscious about ourselves if we're like, you know, like flexing in front of a mirror as compared to Arnold Schwarzenegger. But what is it? Anorexia is wildly, like, overwhelmingly a problem experienced by young girls, right? So for me, like, her having some of those body positivity issues, it just feels real. That's something that's true to a lot of teenage girl experiences.
Yeah. And that's part of it. I mean, she could, you know, it's a girl can be absolutely lovely, and because she doesn't, I mean, fashion magazines, the whole body positivity movement and hating on fashion magazines. You know who makes fashion magazines? Women. They're made by women for other women to make them feel bad about themselves. And it's
actually, they're mostly made by gay men.
Well, that's a shift, though.
I think he's saying who owns the things, right?
Yeah. There are that has been a shift in the last 15 years, but you go
a little bit longer than that. Like if we go back to like maybe the 70s, it was more like that. But yeah. Yeah, no, I mean she's definitely cute, but it's the way she carries herself that makes her more of a plain Jane.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very reserved. To me, part of the fun also is very reserved, very shy. She's a tomboy in the sense that she's doing like combat sports, but she doesn't have the archetypal tough tomboy personality type, which is
Right.
kind of the fun part of the fun for me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all the Nebraska, right?
Yeah. Well, and the farm quality. I don't know. I could like pull out some like Galaxy Brain, like tomboy memes here or whatever, right?
Oh, when I think of a tomboy, the farm girl is the first thing that actually comes to my head.
Yeah, absolutely.
I didn't want to use stock anime personality cliches. Oh, it's the girl. It's the childhood friend who's a tomboy versus the magical girl who's yandere or whatever. Like the way I think about people is a person has like a worldview, a person has a desire they're going after, and then their personality and kind of like their quirks, sort of like the silly aspects of their personality, all tie into that totality, right? So for me, writing is very much I'm playing pretend when I write. I'm playing pretend if I was this kind of person, what would my life be like, and what would my goals be like, and then kind of like pushing that idea forward as I work through the scenario, right?
Mm-hmm. So let's think a little bit about the cast of characters that we have, right? So you've got Jane and her large family, her older brother John, who is an Olympian, correct?
Correct. Yes, he is an Olympic athlete. Yeah.
And by the way, I'm not sure if I'm picking up on something or not. In that picture right there with him riding on a horse.
Yeah.
Is he supposed to be looking like he's some kind of knight in shining armor?
Yeah. Overwhelming, like the sun framing him like a halo.
Right.
Like I needed you to take one look at this and say, she lives in his, I get it. She lives in his shadow. Yeah.
And so later on, she's on a bike with the other guy, and they're putting on helmets, and those helmets I noticed looked very much like medieval helmets. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to figure out if there's something that's going on every time someone is mounted on something or whatnot.
Okay, you're picking something up. Yeah. So let's see here. Dollar, the guy that she's riding with there, right. His helmet, I found just kind of like a cool aviator helmet. So sometimes I have like an aesthetic. So Dollar's aesthetic is kind of like a 1940s aviator type, and very much, yes, a knight in shining armor is one of kind of like the aesthetic ideas behind John Smith and Clark Kent. Clark Kent was one on like the short list of notes of how to design this guy, right? What is it? Bruce Timm's design sensibility for Batman, the animated series, with the very squarish jaw. So yeah, and one
so
thing
that's supposed to be his helmet he's putting on her? Is that the deal?
That is his helmet. Yeah, he's giving her his helmet, right? So he has a knight in shining armor sensibility, and I kind of want helmets to be a aspect of the virtual reality. So anytime I can put in a sexy motorcycle helmet, I will.
So everybody has a kind of look to them based on the character. And if I may predict the future, then does that mean Jane has yet to figure out what she's going to look like in the VR, and when she does so, we will get the answer?
Yeah. So you're kind of seeing she's wearing a default outfit, I think. Right. So she doesn't know what she's going to look like. She's hesitant. Martha asks her if she'd like to come up with an outfit, and Jane is hesitant to do that. Jane doesn't kind of like the idea of dress up. She wants to get right to the fighting. She's
also a little traumatized by it,
and a little traumatized by playing dress up. Right. We should probably let me highlight that.
That's right.
Real quick. Yeah. So
it is a perfect example. Actually, even as an elephant, she was cute.
Yeah. I owe a great debt to Charles Schultz. I don't think that if Charles Schultz came up with a battle manga and tried to draw it in charcoal, I hope that's what I could aspire to.
That is the weirdest sentence I have ever heard.
And yet I love it.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things about that too is it's beginning with that reflection and her not fitting in and feeling like she doesn't fit in, even though she does. I mean, like her friends appreciate her. They're just, kids are just kids, right? And all kids bully each other. That's just part of the deal. But to see her, feeling the need to frame her existence is so interesting to the end of the book, and her hashing out her feelings about her brother. I'm not to spoil too much, but I think that's one of the most honest and interesting things I've seen in a comic in like a long time.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I knew because she has this negative aspect of hate. She has hate in her heart, right? And I kind of wanted to be careful that I didn't want her to become obnoxiously like evil to her brother. So right now, most people don't know. Her parents don't even know that this is a problem. It is purely inside her heart. So I needed to show some aspects of herself so that you could understand it, so that it just wouldn't be like a person who's like full of hate, right? You need to see who is she as a person, why is she like this, what's hurt her, right? I guess something kind of like weird about the way I write is, even though there is like this, I'm deliberately kind of like critiquing the feminist idea of a protagonist, I'm actually hitting a lot of the things that the SJW types say they want to see in their stories. I've got a strong female protagonist who is not sexualized and is very strongly defined by kind of like masculine, combative, heroic characteristics, right? But then I also want her to be a flawed character, right? And I don't just want her to be defined by her flaw. I want to see her overcome her flaw, and I wanted to see her make progress towards overcoming her flaw in the first book.
Mm-hmm. And she very much, and one of the things I really that I'm really impressed with it is, like I said, it's honest, it's real. She seems like very much like a real girl, and that's I really appreciate that. Nanji asks, how much older is John supposed to be than Jane?
John is supposed to be a high school senior, so he's going to probably nearly 18.
Wow, he's big.
Yeah, big boy. Yeah. And Martha's going to be 1 year older than Jane. So it'll probably be Jane's 14, Martha's 15. John is probably like 17 and a half.
So we have Jane, and we have her big family. That includes her younger sister, who is a
Josie. We got to talk about Josie.
Got to talk about Josie. She's a super important part of
the best character.
She's a very, very important character, and has a very vital role in the story, but she is not one of the main mover and shakers in the first book anyway.
Yeah. Josie's another one where this character kind of surprised me, because I thought, well, Jane's from a big Christian family. Big Christian families, they need more than 2 kids, right? It doesn't feel like a big Christian family, just 2 kids. So we need at least one more sibling in here. And I played with, maybe she's got like twins who are her younger brother and sister. And I settled on Josie. And then I almost immediately, like, I kind of came up with this on the fly. Josie is deaf and uses a cochlear implant. So you even have this kind of like fun relation where, Jane is sensitive about her ears. Josie literally cannot hear without her implants, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was going to ask about the elephant and see if there was a connection with that.
Elephant was just kind of like, I like Dumbo, right? And I like Babar, so I figured her liking Babar as a kid would kind of give her a little human connection.
Oh. I was just thinking about the ears.
Oh yeah, and that too. I think in like really, really old drafts of this, when I still didn't know who Jane was, kind of like my initial idea is like she's a girl who wants to fly, like Dumbo does. So like one of the first thoughts I had about her character is, well, Dumbo is her favorite movie as a kid, and then as I got to know her better and better, like little things like that stuck with her, right?
Okay.
Very interesting. So Josie, of course, and one of the interesting things that I think you did this as well as anybody. You have Josie communicating, and Josie and Jane communicating to each other in sign language, and that's one of those things that has been done before in comics, and very often to mixed results. but I think you did it as well as anyone. Was there a particular comic property or idea that you went through in incorporating the sign language into the book?
Boy, I had never seen it done before, right? So I just said, well, they've got to communicate by sign language. Josie needs to know sign language if she's literally deaf without her cochlear implants. Isaac mentions, yeah, it makes it. I think it helps if you know about Jane that she's learned sign language just to talk to her sister. Like, I think that helps humanize it because of her negative aspects. She needs some like pet the dog moments, right? So she's learned sign language just to have kind of like a private language to talk to her little sister. And I literally just like started teaching myself the signs, and because it doesn't blend well with comics, because American Sign Language, it's a very slow way of communicating, right? So usually I will pick one word out of the sentence and represent that with emotion. And I think it mostly works. If they are kind of like communicating a whole idea by sign language, I might slow it down and show each sign, or just pick one sign out of the sentence and use that to kind of like visually underscore that they are using this to emphasize their words.
Well,
Yeah,
what's
like the most
interesting about
important
that?
action
sorry.
or whatever.
You go ahead.
I was saying, like,
Mark?
would you pick like the most important action or whatever out of like the sign that would be distinct for what they're saying, or
Yeah, like maybe the most emphasized idea. So like stop. If you're saying stop pestering me, then stop is the most important word in that sentence. Would kind of be how I dumb it down.
Gotcha. I was thinking about how we already do that when we have to draw the mouth, because we can't possibly draw all the mouth movements and positions for all the different words, but we do have to pick something that represents roughly what the person is feeling and how they're presenting themselves.
So in this panel, Josie is signing the word off, and this art is old enough. I'm cringing, right, because my hands are really awkward. But she is using, she's signing the words off as she's saying, "No, thank you. I'm turning my listening ears off now."
So one of the things that the first book I ever read, and I know it's been in other places, but the only one that sticks in my mind at this exact moment, Teen Titans, New Titans, by Wolfman and Perez. Jericho was deaf, and so he would often communicate through sign language. And so that was yep. And
I just knew he didn't talk, but I didn't know why.
Yep. I guess I actually remember wrong. It is that he's mute, not that he's deaf. It is that he's mute. And so that would be a device. And typically it was fine with the way they would with way Perez would draw it, but every once and again they would spend like a whole page spelling out like a word. Yeah, that may be Fizz may be correct. His mute because his throat was slit. That may be correct. I would have to go back and look at it. It's not staying in my mind at the moment, but it was Deathstroke's kid. They would also sometimes communicate by taking over other people's bodies. So, but yeah, so that would be. We do have a question from the chat. Star says, "Oh, hey, besides the fighting game, do other people do other hobbies like singing or performing?"
Oh, within this world. Okay. Let me think. So the way I'm conceptualizing it is this fighting game is sort of the most popular game in their world. So it's their version of, I want to be a contender, right? So if you want to be like a celebrity, I guess Fortnite actually would be the closest thing, right? Where it's so insanely popular, getting good at it can actually become a career for you. And I guess it's kind of implied that people are using VR for other things like princess dress-up games. I am trying to think of other ways that virtual reality can connect.
kind of like,
in this
have you ever
world.
seen Metabots, right? Where like, just like any of these Japanese series where there's like this one weird toy or game that's taken over society. I guess Pokemon's kind of the same way, except that's entirely a different world. But like in Metabots, the whole thing is that you've got these robots that you're collecting and they're battling each other. But like regular everyday people are also using them to help out at their stores or to do like whatever with. Pretty much if you're trying to capture that type of world, and you said this was very much started as a parody of Yu-Gi-Oh, any world is going to end up working like that, where this is like the big thing, but then there's like offshoots because, it's life and people do other things in life.
and I actually don't get into it too much in the first book, though I do try to foreshadow it. Having virtual pets is a big thing. So we get some glimpses of Martha's pet gorilla bear. And so like having a, Tamagotchi type Pokemon animal companion is a big thing in this world. I wanted to show Jane before we meet her animal companion, because I sort of see her animal companion is like, this is the big twist. This is going to be the thing that changes her scenario and like helps her start fighting. And so right now she's incomplete. She's one half of a fighting team. Once she gets Akira the monkey, then the two are going to become a fighting team together. But I wanted you to know the human character before you get to know her animal character, right? Like her Pikachu.
Gotcha.
But you remember that was for you a change in decision for even the title, because earlier on you were referring to the project as just Jane and Akira.
Okay. Originally its title was Leap Year, and I just didn't like that because I thought, well, that doesn't say anything about what it is. So you get some hints that the game is called Leap Year. They have a tournament on Leap Year's Day because I wanted like a cool, symbolic calendar day when it happens. I settled on Jane Smith Wannabe Gladiator because she's the protagonist, and I've used Jane and Akira, I think, for like some marketing. My deleted Twitter was Jane and Akira because I sort of see those as the two overarching characters. But since Akira doesn't appear in the first book, I didn't want to have his name on the title, right? Quite yet. So.
That would confuse a lot of people, yeah.
Yeah, I was actually confused the first time I started reading through it. I was just like,
Yeah.
well, where's the monkey?
The working title for book 2 is Jane and Akira because he's going to kind of like steal the show in book 2, I think.
Very cool.
I'm curious. I don't think it mentioned this, and so if you don't want to spoil something, I'll understand. But I'm curious about the place they're actually doing this. Is this in someone's home? Is it a business or their local university? How exactly is this VR system set up, especially if people are doing this around the world, I would assume?
Yeah, I know the answer to this question.
Oh, okay. So the way I envisioned it is Martha's family is of means, so they have extremely expensive virtual reality technology that almost no one has. So
she's going over to her friends to play.
Yes, she's going over to her friends to play. There's no way she can afford this technology on her summer job. But in book 2, I'll get into some of this because my idea is there is a cheaper version of the game that almost anyone can afford and play. But to certain people like Martha's family, they're essentially buying the dream of the expensive machines that give you the full dive experience, right? So in real life, this would be like the distinction between AR and VR, right? Like you can Pokemon Go is an AR game where you can find Pokemon in the real world using your mobile phone, right? And almost everybody has a mobile phone, so you don't.
I was going to ask if they can bring their pets home with them.
Yeah.
But now Martha had some kind of ominous boss or something that was leading to.
Oh yeah, okay. So you're hopping ahead a little bit. Yeah.
Okay.
So we meet. We get a glimpse of the head of the school's leap year team. So since the game is called Leap Year, a leap year club is a group of students who play the game together.
Okay.
Yeah, we only get a couple glimpses of him, but he's going to be the big bad guy. There's going to be some like Joker energy there. Isaac Larkin asks, why not just an arcade? Yeah, I think there are arcades in this world, but I wanted Martha to be like pretty rich as compared to Jane, so that there's like a culture contrast between the two of them. And it kind of made sense to me that, why is Martha on this team? Well, her family owns the technology, right? So that kind of is a real plus. Like people really want to play in the VR machines, right? So owning one of them makes you one of the cool kids, right? And
I had a question on the thing, and not to super interrupt, but it's my show. The oh man, I lost my snarkiness. I forgot my question.
Oh my
gosh.
That'll teach you.
There you go. Hoist on my own petard.
Did it come from what we were talking about? We were talking about teams and clubs.
Something about Martha specifically.
Well, I was going to ask if Martha's team was like, trying to get into the big leagues of, the League of Legends tournaments.
There's definitely going to be an element of that. Yeah. So they're not just like, I think you can kind of get some hints of this, but the captain is very ambitious, and it's not enough for him to just play the game. He wants to dominate in this game.
Okay.
I remember what it was. So one of the things in the first book, you establish that, you know, Martha has money, she has means, she has resources, she goes to public school, she knows who the X-Men are, whereas the Jane's family, they are rural country, they do not have the extra cash, they do not know who the X-Men are, and so in explaining the process, you compare the Danger Room to the Imagination Station from
that was the panel Twitless liked so much, because it's a dual cultural reference joke where the two characters know different cultural references. Yeah,
exactly, and I actually love that. But where did Jane, and this is something I don't believe was addressed, maybe I missed it, but where did Jane and Martha meet?
Okay, so
what is their intersection? Why they would?
All right, so I view Martha as a more secular girl than Jane, but Martha actually is at the Christian school. So Bethlehem Christian School is the name of the school, and it's pretty prestigious, right? So there's going to be kind of like a culture aspect where, you know, like I went to a Christian private school, so there are people at Christian private school because that's a ritzy thing to be at, and then they're going to be like the church people where, you know, Christian school is like their thing, that their mission is essentially devoted to, you know, this Christian education ministry. So I wouldn't say that like Martha's, I don't see Martha as an atheist. I just see her as maybe like a girl who's a little more worldly than the sheltered homeschool girls, you know, to give like some opportunities for, you know, them to be comedic foils, maybe have like, I think Martha says ass at some point, right? And then Jane doesn't even like it when someone uses the Lord's name in vain. But yeah, Martha's at the same Christian school Jane's going to be going to.
Okay. So that was the question I couldn't remember. I was like, oh, what was it? Yeah, that was it. So yeah. So okay. So Jane in this, she's going through the tutorial, learning all the stuff. Martha gets caught up. There's a more, I cannot remember the golem creature. Forgive my lack of memory in here.
I just call them golems.
Yeah. That comes up. Is that a thing that Jane wakes it up with the dummy?
Okay. Let me refresh. So they're traveling along 3 paths. Each of them fights a golem. She accidentally. So I kind of thought this was a nice bit. She saw Martha got hurt. She freaked out and ran over to Martha and ran into the path of the second golem by mistake. So she doesn't. One of the things Martha says to her is, you know, just stay focused. And Jane frequently loses her focus, and she has, what do you call it? Unforced errors, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'll mention this. So John actually doesn't show up too much in book 1. He shows up mostly in flashbacks, because I knew he was going to be an important character. He's not physically present in the midst of all of this, so he's present in Jane's thoughts, essentially, right? So yeah, so the red golem, she's only fighting by accident because she lost her focus and ran right smack into it, essentially. Oh, did that answer your question?
Yes, that was the lead in. And oh my gosh, hang on a second. Somebody say something with my nose itches.
Okay, your nose itches. Let's see here. I'm trying to remember. Now I found it interesting how the whole shields system worked.
Yeah, let me pull up one.
Yeah, it wasn't quite the same, but it was very Smash Brothers-y.
Shield.
Yeah, I'll confess to I played a lot of Smash Brothers. I also think a lot about kind of like martial arts systems. So I wanted I wanted something that would evoke the idea of yin and yang in the martial arts system. So you have shields, like the Fantastic Four are this, right? The Fantastic Four are the 4 elements. Human Torch is fire. Reed Richards is water. Thing is earth. Sue Storm is air, right? So
Right.
Sue Storm shields, kind of like aggressive, fiery techniques. But I didn't just want to ape, like Avatar: The Last Airbender, Earth, Water, Wind, and Fire. So,
Right.
But those are my inspiration points. But I kind of wanted to I guess bury them a little bit. But you have offensive and defensive magical powers essentially that can augment real martial arts techniques. So like a knife hand strike can be augmented by the offensive power.
Right.
Plus,
So-
like if you're trying to go yin and yang, you'd be using the 5-element system, not the 4.
You're right. Yeah, because it's not always there are different classical element systems, right?
Which actually brings up another thing that I kind of want to ask about too. We've talked. I know this. We've alluded to this before, but I don't think we've ever directly discussed it. Correct me if I'm wrong, there, Metal. You might remember, but one of the things that shows up with a lot of the in-game techniques are the hand positions, and I know you've mentioned that at least some of your inspiration from that comes from the medieval Christian iconography. And what was I guess what were your how did that does that did or does that play into things, and or is that something you want to discuss at this point?
I guess I could, yeah, I'll touch on it briefly. So again, sometimes there's like a practical problem and then there's a symbolic idea. So the practical problem is, well, how do you use abilities in this game? And I figure, well, hand gestures. And again, it's tying into kind of like the cool sign language thing, right? You use your hands to activate abilities in this world. And then once I have to settle on, well, what are the hand gestures? Then I think it was as simple as I knew about like the Christian symbol of, the sign of the church or the sign of blessing from classical art. So I figured, okay, let's use that for shields. It's a protective symbol of blessing, protection against evil. Let's associate that directly with the shield ability. And it's a hand gesture that you aren't likely to make by accident very easily. A fist is just like a perfect one for activating an offensive power. And I think the ones for the attraction force, the pull force, it's literally just the Spider-Man symbol. I'm just praying that Marvel doesn't pay attention long enough to sue me, right? Well, okay. I'll touch on this a little bit. Because Jane comes from like a little, maybe like sheltered Christian background, I even kind of like the idea that as she's playing this game, she's going into a world that is outside of that frame of experience. So I remember as a kid, like my parents didn't mind Pokemon, but there was a lot of talk of Pokemon being of the devil because the characters use elemental powers, and you're summoning them out of balls like you summon demons, right? So I didn't even mind the idea that
Wait. You have demons and balls?
Yeah, sure. So I didn't even mind the idea, like
they got way crazier than that, to be honest.
Yeah, right. So I didn't mind the idea that like people in kind of like a fundamentalist context would see this game and say, "Oh no, they use the sign of the devil in this game, and it's the Spider-Man hand symbol, right?"
Yeah, you just have to tell them,
Tankatron
like, well,
came right in as I was talking about satanic hand gestures.
Oh no, not again!
Yeah, you just be like, hey, Solomon built his whole temple by manipulating dark spirits. If you can manipulate it too, that's a very, religious thing to do.
Okay, is that in the Deuterocanonical works? I missed that one in Sunday school. I was also, someone asked about Samurai Jack. Yes, down to I literally have the 3 blind archers. I confess it. I'm a Samurai Jack stan.
So I was actually going to ask about that because I was I am not that familiar with Samurai Jack, and I was wondering what the inspiration was for the Raven Archers.
Yeah, okay. So. Right out of Samurai Jack, there is an episode where he fights 3 blind archers. I couldn't resist. Samurai Jack is... There's probably like about 50% of my imagination is dedicated to memorizing Samurai Jack. What's special about it is a action cartoon that kind of like principially they don't have a problem doing purely visual stories. So if one of their writing philosophies was, if the average cartoon is just like filling up every second of the show with, talking, because we don't want any dead air time, they'll just have like a whole episode where maybe 10 minutes is devoted to sort of quiet contemplative scenes as Jack approaches the fight, followed by like a really intense action sequence where he defeats his opponent, right? So it's one of the most visually inspiring things I've ever seen. It meant so much to me as a young boy. It kind of like helped me form my picture of what it is to be a man watching Samurai Jack. So the fact that I love it so much from a sort of visual action perspective, I couldn't resist having a direct nod. I did change it up a bit. I think the Samurai Jack blind archers are inspired by Anubis and kind of like Egyptian ideas.
They're closer to set than anything like the set piece, but yeah.
That is really interesting, because I took this a totally different way. I was thinking, because they're blind, they resemble game characters in how they don't necessarily need to be smart. They might just be firing in a specific direction and a specific pattern, so as to give you, the player, the proper challenge to be able to avoid each one of those arrows.
I gotcha. Okay, I did kind of I think I made a point that they respond to sound. So I think she rips her cloth, she rips her sleeves off. Her idea is to throw it at Martha to distract her. Wow. It's not very aerodynamic, so it plops on the ground. It hears the plop like a loud sound, and then fires 2 arrows right at it. Right, so that I might as well have like cribbed that right out of that episode of Samurai Jack, because sometimes it's like I have a cool action idea, and then I build the scene around getting to that cool action idea, and then she realizes she's in trouble. Scritch stands on the ground, and this is kind of cool. The arrow rips her speech bubble in half, right?
Yeah, that's great.
But that is also something that can only happen where like video game logic works, because in real life, the rip would make a larger sound than the cloth plopping to the ground.
Good point. Yeah. You might have just fridge logicked me there.
Yeah.
Well, okay, I'm gonna challenge you here, actually, because there's one thing I certainly did not expect in this game world of all these special abilities and shields, and how you have extra lives, and it's acting very much like a game. And then suddenly, I'm seeing her be able to do things like skin her knee, rip her clothes, lose both shoes. And they literally take parts of her clothing off and throw it around and have it be affected. I was not expecting that level of complexity from a VR game like this, even with that level of technology.
Well, and some of that is, again, Samurai Jack. He always like ends up in some state of like his gi getting ripped. And to me, like showing that they're getting their clothing ripped is a way of showing like how much trouble they're in. So the more it progresses, the worse your scenario gets. Yeah. So.
Yeah. I mean, that's a long held comic book trope. Yeah. I mean, even it shows up in Die Hard. We were talking. Star mentioned Die Hard earlier in the conversation, but you look at Batman, you can tell how tough the villain was by how little of Batman's cape is left by the last page.
But I'm trying to think of this stuff being able to be programmed into this game as an ability, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, just like the battle damage model. I think that would the skin.
You just make everything like a separate asset that's basically got its own like hurt box and health quality to it.
Okay, I got a question about like how is she catching the arrow? So the challenge for me was I have this whole game world in my head. How do I explain it in such a way that I'm not filling in gaps? So I think there is a line earlier where Cordelia says, when you activate the shield, objects within the shield are paused. So she's not catching the arrow out of midair. The shield is pausing the arrow before it hits her, and then she can grab it. But then once the object is in the shield with you, you're stuck with it. So she manages to stop the arrow and immediately trips and falls on her face. So one of the nice things about Cordelia being a tutorial character is I can use her to literally come out and explain, this is what's going on. This is how
that's what
the power works. Yeah.
About that. Yeah. And the whole time I was reading her, I was picturing that voice in my head of the the text-to-speech AI you hear in every one of those Instagram memes.
No, I don't. Okay, what's the AI Instagram?
Oh, how to if you ever hear, well, not, I mean, just, people making Instagram shorts, TikTok shorts, etc. Right? There are a select group of AIs people use. There's like two or
Common
three
voices.
famous ones, right? And I'm not gonna be able to describe which one. It's just like, I think it's the only female voice I know of. So if you ever watched a YouTube video that, or short, that has the same voice you've heard 1,000 times, that's what I'm picturing.
Isn't that the same voice they use for the Temu ads?
Yeah,
I don't know. I don't think I've ever seen
that
one.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
see, the voice in my head, I just kept hearing like
But with
Navi
that-
from
Navi,
Ocarina of
yep.
Time.
Yep, we're on the same
Oh,
wavelength. I was thinking a little
Hey,
Navi,
listen.
and a little GLaDOS from Portal as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, okay, I'll brag about this. So, the fairy's named Cordelia, the character from King Lear, and
King Lear, yeah.
And the game is made by Lear Tech, right? So I wanted a King Lear reference in her as well.
Okay. So, very, very interesting. So,
someone asked about this. So, the arrow she had a shield is timed, right, and it becomes more battle damage as it starts the longer you hold it up. So she takes it down and just barely manages to get off a cyclone attack. So it's not like she herself can catch arrows in midair, but the cyclone ability itself functionally it's like a high risk shield. You're physically throwing your shield at something to block it, but now you don't have the shield around you anymore to protect you. I'll answer the question in the chat. Oh, good. Someone already beat me to it. Look at that. Your chat, once again, your chat rocks, Matt.
yeah. It's Isaac, man. He's doing the thing. So Tank said he was here.
All right. So, okay, I actually appreciate constructive critique on this. So my goal was I want to introduce a lot of supernatural video game abilities, and I'm just hoping I'm explaining enough that it makes sense. So from an outside perspective, does the game make sense to you guys, even if you're not a gamer? Like, can you follow what's going on throughout the tutorial level?
I had no problem with that, with it, but I wouldn't call myself a gamer, but I do occasionally play.
I really appreciated how there were a lot of details, like, when you're out of lives, you're also out of shields, but at the same time, it triples your strength, so you go on one last, attempt to save yourself.
Like a berserk mode.
Yeah.
Right, like that was all very, well thought out, and it's like, sounds like the kind of thing that you would, create an actual mechanic out of.
Yeah. So Tank asked, is the character safe in her room? Well, she is safe in her friend's room.
Yeah.
But,
At Martha's house. Yeah.
Yeah, at Martha's house.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm probably not the best person to give an opinion on from like a non-gamer standpoint. I've played way too many games.
Now, but yours might be interesting as a gamer standpoint, because you're actually picking up some of the game cultural references I'm pulling from.
Right? Oh yeah. There's a lot in there. Like it's loaded.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and to address Tank's question, we talked earlier about the fact that this is the first time in history that someone has written a video game story in which if you die in the game, you do not die in real life.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it's the first time.
Yeah, well,
but it does seem to be less
like
common now than it used to be.
Yeah, I have one here where right here. This is press start game over Super Rabbit Boy, where the player is in no peril at all. Also, it's a comic written for like 5-year-olds, so there would be
Well, there's also like dot hack, where depending on which version you're into, there's like maybe a single person that might be connected or trapped to the game, but everybody else can log out. The real problem tends to be that the game that they love is in peril, and they have to do something to try to fix it, or else they'll have to go on and do something else with their lives.
Yeah,
So
like manga's starting to use a game world as just like an isekai, right? Like, oh, you don't die and go to a real world. You're just playing a virtual world, and we're going along with the idea that the kids take seriously. They're going to save, Fantasia, or whatever. So that's the drama: is can they beat the video game level?
So Tank asks, "What are the stakes?" Well, the stakes are her soul, Tank.
Yeah. Okay. So my way. Yeah.
That's not what it sounds like.
This is important, right? So for me, the stakes are. This is if the exciting element is she's playing this game. The stakes are what are the implications of this for us? Like what are the stakes of AI art? And AI basically being used. All school is now like AI essays and teachers using AI to grade the AI essays, right? So for me, really, what the heart and soul of it is the human characters in the real world, where the game gives you excitement and it's giving you to me, yeah. I don't know if Tankatron heard this, but I sort of wanted to do the opposite of Sword Art Online, where the drama is not dying in the game world. The drama is how it affects people.
Exactly. And one of the things here is because Jane, in the story, she's facing off against all these enemies within the game, and she's learning the skills, and she's trying to define herself, but she is very much there's a peril for her, because there is a darkness in her that she needs to deal with.
Yeah,
that becomes it's up front from the beginning of the story, but it becomes more apparent and defined as her internal monologue processes the struggles she's with and her own motivations. So it's well, I don't think it's that's all part of it. And it actually, one of the things that Josh has done with it, and why I'm so head over heels about this story, is that there's a visceral reality to her interactions with it, and where and at the end of this first chapter, we won't go into spoil it, but what she has to admit to herself in the course of all of that is so poignant, and it's great. I don't know how many people with a story this fun would allow themselves to get that serious about it, and in a way that doesn't detract from it. Like we've been reading Tom King's Wonder Woman here on the show, Marm. I don't know if you've seen that, but Tom so desperately wants to tell a serious story with the characters, and all he does is the same like depressive schlock. There's no real honest internal critique that anyone does. And you have that here.
Yeah, I think Linda Berry once told me, be careful about doing I'm depressed comics, because it could be a cathartic way of dealing with your depression, but it can very quickly become you just making comics about how depressed you are and then just making yourself depressed by doing that all the time.
Right, that feedback loop, right? Yeah. It's that old from old Uncle Solomon, as a man says in his heart, so is he,
Yeah.
Not to mention that we have to read it.
You don't want to make blankets, guys. Come on.
I will never do another live stream about memoir ever again.
Well, it all depends on what memoir we're looking at. I think memoir as a genre can have some really redemptive aspects to it. You just got to get memoir from people that aren't dirt. That's all.
This, by the way, I think like right around this page is where I figured out what the overlay tool was, and then immediately the colors start brightening up from this point on. So I learned.
All right, cool.
I love overlay. Overlay is one of my favorite blending modes.
Horrible
is when people don't know about more than one blending mode, right? Like somebody finds one and they only ever use it, and you can tell when all of them have their different purposes.
Well, I think I only know about one.
I know about them all, but I do like one more than any of the others.
So I'm gonna just give for people who maybe haven't read this story, just kind of like the TLDR is Martha soundly beats Jane. Well, Jane almost wins, but she falls short right at the last end. Martha wins the race, completing the tutorial level. After all that work of the tutorial, now they're finally ready to fight. And just before Jane gets her chance to spar with Martha, that's where Martha gets a call from her classmate and is summoned away, and Jane is left alone. So we're kind of left at the end of this. I don't know what they call them on webtoons. Like I think of it all as one book, but I was sort of limited on webtoons with how many pages I could post. So the end of number 2 on webtoons ends with Jane kind of like entering the fighting arena by herself for the first time, and action picks up from there.
And there's also the end of the, I can't remember, is it the
Do we want to spoil the?
What is that? Yeah.
That we're not quite there yet. We meet Josie again. So there's a pretty extensive fight sequence where Jane encounters an opponent in the second part of the story, and we meet Josie kind of like towards the end of that fight.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So
someone mentioned liking the Jane freaking out about Martha using the word Jesus to take the Lord's name in vain. So that's my favorite panel in the whole book. If you zoom in, and Webtoons, by the way, I post this comic on Webtoons because I just want to like introduce it to more people. Webtoons has probably the most limiting format I've ever seen. That was another learning experience for me. Is I think in later pages, I started chopping up the comic pages and reformatting it into a better format for Webtoons. For the first chunk of pages, I was just literally posting my comic pages on Webtoons as I was going. But it definitely nerfs the quality to put it on Webtoons.
Have you re-uploaded it to Global Comics or something like that? Because Global's probably got the best web reader out of any comic site.
I should try that. Okay, I'll make a note.
You could actually have like 2-page spread and stuff and like read it like an actual comic book.
Or you can also set up panel to panel so that actually like track
the interactive reader.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then Tapas is the one a lot of people talk about. I've been seeing people talk about Global Comics more and more. Yeah, I have a very much
really like Global Comics tools.
My attitude is wherever there are fish, I'll go there. So I posted on X, I posted on Instagram. I will check those sources out because
so does Global scroll or
you could do anyway.
Yeah, you can do Global as a scroll. You can do it as a page format. You can do panel by panel. I mean, they give you some flexibility with it. Usually,
Tapas is good, but you're going to have the same limitations there that you find at Webtoon.
Mm-hmm.
The other format I'm interested in is comic dubbing on YouTube. So I've hired voice actors, and I've called in favors from friends to voice act most of the characters. I've got to fill in the last couple roles, but I am interested in producing an audiobook of book 1.
Ask me. I do voice acting.
Nice. I gotta find.
Really?
I gotta write more males. I have so many girls and little kid characters to fill.
Yep. Or just find some little kids somewhere.
My nephews and nieces are growing up quick. They'll be ready to. I'll be calling in favors for all of the Ninja Turtles and My Little Ponies. I've been buying them.
Yeah, a few years ago, Donji says I want to do comic dubs too. A few years ago, Barry says we really should get onto the comic dub thing and do that with some of Forces. And I'm just like, oh man, that's a whole skill I don't want to learn, man. I understand there's a big market for it, but it's just like, yeah, I don't know. Got to go back to it.
Like, for anyone interested, you can actually watch all of X Time is Chaos episode 1 dubbed, and also the first short for On Tour with Mitch and Sandy in shorts form.
So here, Star says, "Is Josie filled yet? I wonder for her. I've heard that, kids that are deaf have a slight lisp." Yeah,
Right.
I can.
Okay. Josie's role still needs to be filled. Josie's supposed to be like 99% deaf, but can hear with aid of cochlear implants. So I don't know if that would affect it that much. I'd be open to any submissions from kids. So Star, if you want to reach out to me and a special someone who wants to be a voice actress when she grows up, I am still seeking roles. Reach out to me on X, where I am Josh_cartoon guy, or reach out to me by email at janeandakira@gmail.com. Oh yeah, the duck. I remember the duck being a thing a few years ago.
Yeah, I like the description. It's a niche community within a niche community. Yeah, the duck was a huge powerhouse back in the day. And they even got bought up by Platinum Studios, and that was a whole kerfuffle. We could do a deep dive on that if we wanted to, but not today.
Do you guys want to ask any spoilery questions? We could give a spoiler warning, and I'm totally fine spoiling anything you're curious about.
Oh, okay, that sounds like fun. So chat, there you have it. You have permission to ask spoilery questions. Let me think if I can think of any.
Are you doing that? I want to address Tankatron asks where to audition, and also says Cartoonicus can vouch for my skills. I'm going to be brutally honest. I can vouch for the fact that you work with kids. I don't know actually enough about what you do. But I can vouch for the fact that you're a great guy, and somebody should totally work with you. So wherever he can get that information about where to audition.
Yeah. On X, Josh_cartoon guy. That's actually probably the best way to get a hold of me. And I'll announce rules as they open up, because every time I write more, then there are going to be more roles to fill, essentially.
Okay.
So.
Also, if you just need anybody who can make weird noises or sound effects, I can do audio engineering. So hit me up when you need the little stuff like that.
The Foley.
Yes.
The metal. You're Foley guy.
Yeah, I've actually done that for a lot of random people. Yeah, even over on like Newgrounds, there's a few different animations out there where I've just done the sound effects for them, and I did them all for my dubs as well.
So we do have a question. Isaac in the chat says, does she ever partner up with a boy or have a relationship?
All right. There will be boys and girls she's teaming up with in the next book. You can get a glimpse of them. I've started the first few pages of book 2, and you get a glimpse of the members of her team. I don't see this primarily as a romance. I'm maybe like open to exploring those ideas as I go, but that's not going to be the central emphasis. I'm going to more focus on kind of like Jane's coming of age as a person, though. I do think I think there's maybe like it's implied that she has some feelings about Dollar, who we have seen glimpses of in book 1. Yeah, so I would say not the main emphasis, but probably some glimpses of that.
So Najee says, can we find out more about Dollar?
Oh, okay. So I think in book 1, so you hear Martha talking about him a little bit and maybe kind of like telling jokes at his expense because she's his little sister. Dollar, we see Dollar wearing a helmet. I love the thing where they're a mystery until you kind of like, I guess the way to describe it is they're a mystery until the audience meets them, right? So you can sort of like get to know a character before you meet the character. So, like the villain, Aaron, is sort of shadowy and in the background because Jane hasn't met him yet. We know he's out there, but Jane doesn't really know him. Dollar, we kind of know, is Martha's older brother, and he's part of the team, but he's sort of mysteriously absent. And Martha seems to like rib him a bit about, how he's always off doing his own thing. So I have a character archetype in mind for Dollar, and I think people will like him when you get to see him. But he's, for now, we know that he's kind of like he does football. Seems to be a bit of a smart aleck, and Jane likes to hold on to him real tight while they're riding motorcycles. So we will be seeing other characters fight, because my my thought is, the best way to get to know the character is to see them in action. So it's going to become an ensemble cast where all the kids at her school compete in this game as well. And so Jane, as a person, is the protagonist, but she has to work with other people, right? Part of fighting is teamwork. I guess the other thing I'm kind of thinking about is one nice thing about the VR angle is I sort of see gaming's kind of become what young men do to bond, because a lot of the old, the frontier has been tamed, right? Like you can't get teleported to another world where you sword fight. So gaming symbolically is how young people especially can like bond and test themselves, right? So I think the game is going to be that sort of experience for Jane.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting aspect, an idea, and an observation. There's a political commentary, a commentator named Bill Whittle, who says that when he looks at the swath of modern gamer bros and the games they're playing, and how many thousands of conservatives exist without realizing that they have conservative values because the games they're choosing to play are pro 2A, pro individual responsibility, pro save the world.
Not to mention 8 million military shooters.
Yep.
Or there was an interesting one that happened recently with the when Baldur's Gate 3 came out, and they made this very, very loose game where you could pick whatever decision you want. You can go and bang a druid who could turn into a bear. But when they actually looked at the details of like what most people were playing, the vast majority of people played human paladins and were just doing the good route.
They were crusaders.
Yeah.
they were liberating Jerusalem again.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. So a couple other questions we have here in the chat. Is leadership in Jane's future?
Okay. I think you're gonna want to wait to see that in book 2. Yeah. I definitely want her to kind of like come into herself fully as a character. Like I don't want to see her weak and pathetic for the entire series, right? So if her moral arc is, her internal struggle, that I see is the beginning, middle, and end of her story. When you overcome your moral problem, that's kind of the end of the character's story. But the physical, combat action side of it, that's where I have like the most room to kind of like have fun and try different things. So we've seen her sort of struggling to fight in the first book, and I think we've gotten the sense that she has a talent for this game. She's just green and not very experienced in it. And Martha makes the point that Jane isn't a gamer. So the average person who plays this game has a sort of a gamer mentality, whereas Jane has more of a martial arts mentality, which is actually like a very different way of looking at the world. So you will see Jane getting to do a lot of interesting things, I think. I don't see her as being like the captain of the team because that role is already filled, but you're definitely going to see some heads bouncing off each other once the rest of the crew gets together.
So, and you already answered this in the chat, was how many books you're intending. You have 3 books in mind, but do you think that will complete the arc that you're working toward?
I think the first 3 books will be sort of like a season 1 with a satisfying end, and I want to leave it with a setup for more. So I hate cliffhangers. If you read the first 3 books, it'll be like a really satisfying read, I think, with a promise of even bigger and more exciting adventures in future, essentially.
Well, I mean, I think you did a really good job with book 1 of leaving it at a resolution without being the end all of things. So I thought that was an interesting aspect to that. Yeah. Isaac says, does it become like a cyberbullying where she knows people in the real world?
It may be in the general sense. Like I didn't start out by saying I want to make a book about the topic of cyberbullying. I think there might be an element of that where, anytime you have kids on the internet, you have the potential for trouble. And I guess because I'm a millennial, maybe I have a unique experience on this, because to me, the internet is something that came into my life. And then for people my younger siblings age and younger, the internet is a thing they've grown up with from infancy, right? So I actually I kind of have to like force myself out of my generational mentality into the generational mentality of someone like Jane, where this was present from infancy, essentially. Yeah. So I think I'm not afraid to explore that topic. It's probably just not like I'm not setting out to say this is going to be a story about cyberbullying kids. Don't be cyberbullies.
Well, I think one of the differences that you'd have here too is because while people are playing avatars, it's like a team sport, right? So a lot of the kids they're going to be interacting with, they automatically know who they are in the real world because it's part of a school activity, right? So that would be somewhat different than the anonymity of your average cyberbullying aspect.
Yeah.
So
I think we get some hints at it where she's able to access information about her brother through the game world just because he was an Olympian, right? So, you know, big data. These companies know all kinds of stuff about us that we wish, you know, they know things about you you wish your own mother didn't know, right? And so there definitely is like that. I am really interested in like legitimate like AI discourse, right? So for me, like the idea of, yeah, it's a fun game world, but I am not afraid to talk about some of those real world aspects as well.
The deep learning aspects of things. So Ethereal Dragon, I thought liberals want to save the world. No, liberals want to run the world. That's the difference. Conservatives want to save the world because that's what conservation is, to save it. Liberals want to progress the world, and that's to change it. So that is an ontological difference.
Star Storyteller says, "How shady is the centipede? Look at this guy. This is a face."
I was thinking like that. That is a Yu-Gi-Oh villain if I ever saw one.
Come on,
do not fight
trustworthy.
the enemy stand user. The enemy stand user with the centipede. That's going to go bad for you.
I think my design notes on him were like Joker plus Seto Kaiba plus who was my other? But it's Joker plus Seto Kaiba was my rough design idea for him.
I understood half of that. So, but yeah, no, I looking forward to this. So you have book 1 is all up to be read on the webtoon.
Yep.
And you've been working on book 2. How far along are you on that process?
I'm about 10 pages into book 2. I took on a second job this year, so I took a comic hiatus to kind of like concentrate on my career. Things are going really well at work now, so I'm kind of like getting mentally prepped to enter into workflow mode again, and then I'm going to start hammering away at book 2. If you like Martha in book 1, you're going to love book 2 because we actually sort of shift perspective and get to know her a little bit better, and we will be meeting Akira the monkey in book 2. So if book 1 was about introducing you to Jane, book 2 is going to be introducing you to the rest of the cast of characters, and we're just going to have a ton of fun. I am writing for 10-year-old me. I want to write the comic that 10-year-old me would just be like on the edge of my seat at every moment of it. So
Ethereal Dragon says I call being the dragon guy. That's hilarious.
One more follow-up for Star, because she asked, is Martha's boss a creepy dude? He is a high school kid. He is a sophomore. We'll really get to know him well in book 2. The way I would describe him is he's the villain. He is the villain, but he's a part of Jane's team, so not an irredeemable villain. I'm interested in ideas of Christian redemption. So
I can't help thinking that he's like a huge anime fan, and this is like he's the world's biggest poser here.
He's a giant dork.
Right?
He's a villain.
I mean,
he's also a giant dork.
The Kaiba is also kind of just a giant dork. Like, he's smooth, he's cool from the outside, but like he's an orphan who was just like a brilliant genius and good at chess and then became obsessed with a card game. Like, when you break him down, he really is just a giant dork. Like, he blows all of his money just to get revenge on a guy who beat him in a children's card game.
As you're describing it, like I'm sort of realizing, man, I didn't just rip off the design notes. Like Yu-Gi-Oh has also occupied a permanent part of my. Okay. Speaking of video game references, Gary/Blue in Pokemon originally is a giant ass, right? Which is part of the fun. Which is part of the fun of him is because he's so bloody memorable.
Smell you later.
Smell you later. Right. So I kind of like the idea of having someone who is very insufferable in his personality, but still somehow comes off as very charismatic anyway.
Screw the rules. I have money.
Isaac says, "I bet he's a pay-to-win kind of guy."
Oh, okay. Well, I kind of
Absolutely.
envision it as pay to win and those sort of like inner gamer squabbles that is going to kind of come into the world a little bit. I would actually say the opposite. He really, really, really wants to be good at this game. So, the impression we get of him is that he's just sort of an insufferable boss and loves to, bark at the other members of the team. I kind of see that as, well, he wants a competitive, serious team. He doesn't just want to like faff about and treat this as an extracurricular activity.
Right.
That's amazing. Absolutely amazing. Seriously amazing. So, well, I think is that it's probably going to hit us for the night. We're just about at 2 hours on the show. Thank you so much for coming, Josh.
Thank you for having me, Matt, and thank you, the Metal and Cartoonicus, for joining today.
This has been absolutely great. I look super forward to the day when you are ready to go to press and can do a launch party at the High Plains Minicon. Yeah,
you definitely earned it. Yeah, you earned a big signing.
Because I might as well drop word to my very own comic convention.
I'll have to
here in
actually
Western
make
Nebraska.
my way out there for that one.
That would be great. That would be amazing to have that. So, but anyway, that's it for today. Next week, Twitless will be back. He has absolutely promised that he's going to make it. We are going to be talking about Wonder Woman 4, 5, and 6, which means also that Cartoonicus will not be here because he's told us we had him for one Wonder Woman show and that was it. Which I appreciate.
I don't know if I can make it through another one.
Well, I appreciate the effort, man.
You can't get out from under Wonder Woman.
Oh my god.
She's not that fat.
Good night, kids.
Peace, everybody.
Keep reading.
Oh, and thank you to everyone in the chat too for the great questions. You've been a great audience.
Oh, so yes, absolutely. We'll be like I said, next week we got Wonder Woman, and until next time, get out there and read some comics. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.